Welcome to POTUS 2017, where we keep watch on the Oval Office and pour cold, hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Today we visit a conference devoted to making peace between Israelis and Palestinians, the annual J Street Conference held in Washington, D.C., February 25th to 28th. Founded in 2008, J Street is a liberal advocacy group for pro-peace, pro-Israel Americans. It opposes the occupation of the West Bank and supports a two-state solution, that is, an independent Palestinian state alongside a secure Jewish state. Attracting roughly 3,500 participants, the J Street Conference took place just as that elusive two-state goal suddenly looked even more distant because of something that President Trump said during a visit from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
So I'm looking at two-state and one-state, and I like the one that both parties like.
The one-state approach, an idea that has long been outside of the diplomatic mainstream, would in theory create a single entity Israel, including the Palestinian areas of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and perhaps Gaza. All residents would be citizens, regardless of religion or ethnicity. J Street sees this as unfeasible. Also unsustainable because it would either erode Israel as a Jewish majority state or else erode its democracy, trying to guarantee Jewish control. Palestinians are skeptical of the one-state idea too.
They want one state with equal rights? Fine, let's go for that.
The PLO's position clarified later on. Stay with us. Speaking of clarification, Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador, did walk back the president's one-state, two-state comment, saying that the U.S. was just thinking outside the box. Now, speaking at the J Street Conference, Senator Bernie Sanders called Trump's comments typical of his carelessness in managing foreign policy to date. Sanders avoided the one-state, two-state question himself, but urged progressives, both in Israel and the U.S., to demand their governments be guided by values: democracy, equality, pluralism, and the rights of minorities.
The president has said that he supports a peace deal, but this doesn't mean much. The real question is peace on what terms and under what arrangement? Does peace mean that Palestinians will be forced to live under perpetual Israeli rule in a series of disconnected communities in the West Bank and Gaza? That is not tolerable, and that is not peace.
Of course, it's not Senator Sanders making Middle East policy. It's Trump's team, led by the president's son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner. Will they learn the art of a Mideast deal? J Streeters are not hopeful and feel hostility from the White House. Understandable. Trump took direct aim at them by nominating David Friedman for ambassador to Israel. Though Friedman expressed regret for this at his confirmation hearing, he had called J Street's liberal Jews worse than capos, the Jewish prisoners who helped the Nazis during the Holocaust. All right, with all this as background, let's spend 10 minutes or so looking in on one of the most distinguished panels at the J Street Conference.
My name is Thomas Friedman. As we say in the New York Times, no relation to David Friedman, okay? We have a great panel this morning. Rob Malley, former senior advisor to President Obama on the Middle East, Michelle Flournoy, former Undersecretary of Defense, and Martin Indyk, former everything important on the Middle East, okay, for several administrations. I want to begin by posing a question to all of you. What strikes me about this moment, as someone who's, like the three of you, followed this region and this conflict most of my adult life, is I haven't been here before. Haven't been to a time and place where Israel was more free to be whatever it wanted to be. I can't imagine a time when the countries surrounding it were weaker, when Europe was more distracted, and when we had an administration in Washington that either didn't care or wouldn't care about whatever Israel does. Martin, start with you and we'll go down the panel. What do you think this means? What do you expect?
Israel has never been stronger and more capable of taking risks for peace. What better time when you have the President of the United States basically saying, whatever you decide, I'll support. And certainly Congress will too. So, if not now, when? But unfortunately, and I say this with great regret as somebody who strongly identifies as a Zionist and somebody who cares deeply about the fate of the Jewish state and the Jewish people, something has gone very wrong. And there is a deep settler state operating in Israel today that will make sure that peace with the Palestinians, if it involves giving up any kind of territory in the West Bank, simply will not happen. And instead, they see the opportunity to take advantage of this rise of populism and greater nationalism in the United States and around the world to advance their narrow nationalist agenda of annexation of the West Bank. And we know where that leads. Blind Freddie can tell you that that will lead to a binational state, not a Jewish state. And yet they are determined to press on. They have the Prime Minister of Israel by the throat, politically, and there is a great danger that in this permissive environment, they will achieve their objectives. And so I think that really underscores the need to do everything we can to, first of all, see clearly what the agenda is here and call them on it at every step of the way.
Martin, let me just do a quick follow-up before I ask Michelle, and that is, because of your experience, what does it mean to have an American ambassador to Israel who will be to the right of the Israeli Prime Minister?
Look, one shouldn't exaggerate the influence of the ambassador. He's going to be in Jerusalem, he's not going to be in Washington. We're
Good point.
looking at the wrong place. What's important in that regard is that notwithstanding Ambassador-designate Friedman's boasting about how he's going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, it didn't happen.
Michelle, what do you think is going to evolve out of this very unique moment when Israel is home alone more than it's ever been in terms of its diplomatic options?
You know, when I was in the Pentagon, I did spend a lot of time on the question of how do we bolster Israel's security, working in particular on qualitative military edge issues and so forth. And I must say I am more worried now about Israel's long-term security than ever. I agree with Martin that the U.S. commitment to Israel's security is as rock solid as ever. But what disturbs me is that this administration has so sort of cavalierly walked away from a U.S. commitment to supporting a two-state solution that every administration, Republican and Democrat, has held on to and has advocated for decades. I find that more disturbing than anything I've seen in all of my years working on Israel's security issues.
Michelle, I was going to bring up your work at the think tank. Give us the highlights of that security plan, if you could. What is it about why should we understand that there is a way for Israel to have a secure separation agreement with the Palestinians?
So we undertook this study because we understood that the paramount issue for Israelis is the question of security. And we wanted to demonstrate that that question could be satisfactorily answered. And what it involves is a multi-layered security system where, first and foremost, we give the Israeli state the capacity to defend itself by itself to every extent possible. We also do serious capacity building work with a new Palestinian state. But very important is the role of the neighbors. So what role for Jordan, securing the Jordan Valley? What role for Egypt in helping to secure the Sinai? What role for the United States and the international community as guarantors of the arrangement? So it's a very detailed report. And again, it wasn't just a bunch of Americans. We had former IDF and intelligence officials from Israel being part of the design team. But we are also using this to have a series of conversations, not only here, but in Israel, with the Jordanians, with the Egyptians, and with others to try to build consensus around this approach.
Thank you.
I'm going to take a slightly heretical
Please.
view on this. I don't mind what President Trump said for the following reason. Let me ask you a question. If he had said, I believe in a two-state solution, how many people in this room think he actually would have achieved it? Okay, I don't see too many hands getting up. So what he said, Martin and I and many others tried under the Clinton administration, didn't succeed. Then President Bush tried to achieve a two-state solution, didn't succeed. President Obama and Secretary Kerry were as committed as anyone I ever have known to try to reach a two-state solution. They didn't succeed either. There's an honest conversation that now has to take place. Israelis have to ask themselves that question without either the illusion of a peace process, which didn't produce peace, or the notion of American restraint, which didn't really restrain all that much, and ask themselves, what future do we want? How are we going to secure our future as a Jewish democratic state? And if it's not a two-state solution, what is it?
Is it too late for that conversation? Are the settlers, as Martin referred to, just too strong that basically nothing can happen?
If I were to reach that conclusion, I'd be doing something very different these days. So maybe it's just for self-preservation. I'm not prepared to say that what has been built through political decisions can't be unbuilt through political decisions. Mm-hmm. These are decisions. It's not an act of nature. It's going to be difficult, and the politics are going to be wrenching for any Israeli prime minister. But I don't know what the mathematical formula is that tells us the two-state solution is dead and buried.
I think it's dead.
Well, let's talk about that. I was going to ask you about the weather, but if you think it's dead, climate change. Why do you say that?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand in the Holy Land, there's a difference between being dead and buried.
Yes. Go ahead.
So, to declare it dead doesn't mean it doesn't get resurrected. I do imagine there are circumstances under which it can get resurrected. Certainly not with the current configuration of the Israeli government, which is the most right-wing in history and most opposed to a two-state solution, such that the Prime Minister isn't even allowed to say the words when he comes to Washington. But also on the Palestinian side, let's be honest.
If Jared Kushner were here, the president's son-in-law, and seemingly designated the next Martin Indyk of this administration, what would you tell him?
Don't start from here. No, I would tell him, first of all, read Tom Friedman's book From Beirut.
Thank you.
By the way, I'm not just telling you that only to flatter you, because that's what I tell everybody who's new to the Middle East.
Because just to add one thing to the question, because he does seem to have think they rediscovered the wheel, the idea that we'll have the Arab states come in. I mean, those of us who know something about the Saudi peace plan, I mean.
Well, you
it's
were
like,
pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I was 20 years ago.
Yeah, but why do I say read Tom Friedman's From Beirut to Jerusalem? Because you unpacked for the naive American solutionist who comes into the Middle East bazaar believing that in the good old American way, every problem has a solution. And what you explain in the book is that they're all just waiting for you out there, Israelis and Arab leaders alike.
Have we got a carpet for you?
Exactly. And they're all very expert at selling shoddy merchandise and dreams of peace and Nobel Prizes to naive Americans at twice the price and no peace in the end. So secondly, do something which I think I actually give them credit for this, is to take your time to listen to everybody. They need to be talking more to the Palestinians. Jared Kushner, I don't think, has any exposure to the Palestinians. He needs to. His assistant in this was Jason Greenblatt, who's clearly going to have a role there. So I think that listening, taking their time to listen, to get a sense of what actually can be done realistically before they decide what to do is really important.
Former Ambassador to Israel Martin Indyk at the recent J Street conference advising the White House to listen more to all parties, including the Palestinians. Those attending the conclave had that opportunity. Here is part of the address by the chief representative of the General Delegation of the Palestine Liberation Organization to the United States, Man Rashid Erekat.
If this current Israeli government and its supporters in this country do not want a two-state solution, what do they want? They want one state with equal rights? Fine, let's go for that. If this is what they want, we are willing to accept that as a solution to the conflict. However, you all know that this is not what they are seeking to achieve. They are trying to prolong the conflict, to sustain the status quo, and to continue building illegal settlements, continue to swallow more Palestinian land, and to, once and for all, destroy any possibility for the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now, this is an outcome that neither you nor us are working to achieve. And today, despite all the actions that Israel is taking on the ground, we continue to be committed to a two-state solution, because what we are having today is one state with two systems, where we have an occupation, a settlement enterprise, and a population that does not have any control over its life and is still under military occupation. So when we talk about two-state and one state, we have to be careful, because the alternative to a two-state is not going to be favorable to either Israelis or Palestinians. Of course, we cannot ignore the recent changes that took place in this country, the new administration, the confusion about one state, two state, then back to we like a two state. Everybody is confused here. We are confused as much as you are. It's going to be difficult to predict the course of action that this administration is going to take. However, we are ready to engage this administration. I want to touch on the issue of anti-Semitism and tell you all, if you don't know, that I am a Semite. So you have to understand, I am a Muslim Semite, and we have we have to all work together to make sure that these bigots, racists, anti-Semites, Islamophobists do not succeed in this country. We know history. We know history very well. It's not a surprise when a mosque is attacked or torched that the first to come to condemn it are American Jews in this country. And it was not a surprise to see a group of Muslim charities raise $100,000 last week to repair damage to Jewish cemeteries. I want Palestinian children and Israeli children to have a better future and a better life. And we only can do that if we put an end to this perpetual conflict based on a two-state solution, Palestine and Israel. A viable, sovereign, democratic, contiguous Palestinian state that can live side by side with Israel in peace and security. Security for both, because we need security. And this is not a slogan. Believe me, it's not a slogan. This is a very solid commitment on the part of Palestinians, the PLO, the Palestinian leadership, to continue to work with you to promote our joint message and to achieve our joint objectives. Thank you very much.
Reaching out a hand, PLO diplomat Man Rashid Erekat. No mention there, though, of compromises that his side would have to make to reach a two-state solution. In our final minutes at the J Street Conference, let's return to that panel led by New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman, which begins with a cautionary tale about the rhetoric we've heard today and what the Trump administration will hear in the future.
You know, you remind me from Beirut to Jerusalem, Martin, the central story there was when I was living in Beirut with my wife in the early 1980s, we used to walk by a carpet store off Hamra Street every day. And they had this beautiful blue Persian carpet in the window. And we admired it every day. And one day we said, let's just go in. And the owner takes it out of the window. He lays it down on the floor. And he takes a high-intensity lamp and puts it on top of it so we can examine the threads. It was just beautiful. And we then said, would you flip it over? And so we can see the threads on the back. And he did. And the second he did that, there was a power surge, which often happened in Beirut, and the high-intensity lamp exploded. And burning shards came down on the back of the carpet. And without missing a beat, he said, you know, sometimes they're worth more this way. Okay? So, I never forget that. That's the story I would tell Jared Kushner. And so I think of that when I think of the job of being Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State today or National Security Advisor. And I want to close with each of you talking about this and give each a chance. Is this not the worst time to be responsible for American foreign policy? That if somebody comes to you and says, Martin, Michelle, Rob, I'd like you to be Secretary of State, wouldn't you really want to say, I had my heart set on agriculture? You know, I mean, that the Cold War was all about managing power. The post-Cold War was all about American power. And the post-Cold War is all about managing weakness, ours, our allies, and weak collapsing states. And that is hell on wheels.
You know, I don't think, given our historical role, architecting the post-World War II order that has provided the basis for stability, economic growth, incredible peace and prosperity in a number of regions of the world, given the pressures on that order, the fraying of the order. This is what the report that Martin and I participated in is all about. America has to lead. We don't get the choice to step back and say, we don't have an interest in how the order, whether the order survives, whether it's adapted to deal with new realities. To do that is to throw away not only an historical legacy, but any hope that we're going to get a better future that's more conducive to both our interests, our values, and our ability to continue to be a force for good in the world.
Yes, it's difficult. It's always difficult. But the United States has huge ability to lead the world. There's still a great deal of desire for American leadership. When the President of the United States says we're going to put America first, he sends a signal to everybody else, let's put our own interests first. Everybody else, particularly the larger powers like China and Russia who want to do that anyway. The rest of the world looks to the United States not just to put its own interests first, but to put the interests of this international order, freedom, rule of law, and protection of smaller states against the stronger ones, and promotion of all of the
Slow down, I'm writing my next column.
global and multilateral agreements and institutions, particularly in climate change, but in so many other ways in which over the last 70 years, the United States has constructed a world order that serves not only American interests, it definitely does that, but serves the interests of the vast majority of humanity. And if we give that up, if we give that up now for some sense of narrow, selfish purpose, we will, in the end, reap the whirlwind.
Bless you. Rob, you're batting cleanup. You got a free one.
So I see time's up. I'm going to be very, very quick and try to turn your question around. Basically, your question is this the worst time to be the U.S. given what's happening in the world? Maybe the right question is this the worst time to be the world given what's happening in the U.S.?
Oh, wow. Well done. Let's thank this great panel.
A brief glimpse of the three-day J Street conference in Washington that concluded February 28th. Of course, the Israel-Palestine issue is complex, controversial, a life and death matter on both sides. This has been a report from one conference with a point of view. We've kept that in mind. We hope you have too. And that's POTUS 2017 for today. We're here each week at this hour, keeping watch on the Oval Office and pouring cold, hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.